A man's character is not defined by the badge on his belt, but by the integrity in his heart. For FBI Special Agent Jack Thorne, a decorated operative deep undercover, his character was about to be tested under the piercing red and blue lights of a local police cruiser. He was on the verge of dismantling a brutal human trafficking ring that had plagued the state for years. But on a humid Georgia night, to two small-town cops, his skin color was his only crime. They tried to break him, to jail him, to erase him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. What happened in the next 9 minutes wouldn't just change their lives. It would detonate a truth so explosive it threatened to burn their entire town to the ground. Special Agent Jack Thorne felt the suffocating humidity of the Georgia night press in on him, a stark contrast to the sterile, air-conditioned environments he was used to at the FBI's Atlanta field office. He was operating under the alias Malik, a mid-level fixer with a taste for high-stakes logistics, a cover that had taken him 6 painstaking months to build. His target was a ghost known only as the Serpent, the architect of a sprawling human trafficking network that preyed on the vulnerable, snatching people from bus stations and back roads and spiriting them away into a nightmare of forced labor and exploitation. Thorne, a Howard University graduate with a law degree and a mind as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, was the Bureau's best shot at catching him. At 34, he had a reputation for being methodical, unnervingly calm, and capable of blending into any environment. He'd spent the last 2 weeks in the forgotten town of Oak Haven, Georgia, a place that time seemed to have overlooked. It was a town of peeling paint, drooping willow trees, and secrets that festered beneath the surface of Southern hospitality. Intelligence suggested the Serpent used Oak Haven as a transit hub, a quiet lily pad for moving his product before shipping them to larger cities. Thorne's mission tonight was simple: make a controlled delivery of untraceable electronics to a low-level contact, a man named Jimmy Weasel Sykes. The exchange was a final audition, the key that would unlock a face-to-face meeting with the Serpent himself. He drove a nondescript, slightly beaten-up 2012 Ford Fusion, the kind of car that was everywhere and nowhere. He wore jeans, a dark t-shirt, and a worn leather jacket, the uniform of his alias. In the trunk, a duffel bag contained the prop electronics. Taped to the small of his back beneath his shirt was his service weapon, a Glock 19. His credentials and a burner phone were concealed in a hidden compartment in the car's dashboard. He was a federal agent, armed and on official duty, but to the world, he was just another shadow in the night. His handler, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASAC Vivian Knight, had been clear during their last encrypted call. "This is the final gate, Jack. Sykes is jumpy. The Serpent is paranoid. Any deviation, any attention, and the whole house of cards comes down. You are dark. No contact unless it's a code red." He understood the stakes. The ghosts of the victims he'd seen in case files haunted his thoughts. Teenagers, immigrants, runaways, all reduced to entries on a spreadsheet for the Serpent's profit ledger. This wasn't just a case. It was a crusade. He turned onto Chestnut Street, a poorly lit road on the outskirts of Oak Haven. The meeting point was an abandoned gas station a mile ahead. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. His car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a tunnel of trees. He checked his rearview mirror out of habit. Empty. He focused on the road, his mind running through contingencies. What if Sykes brought friends? What if it was a trap? What if the sudden flash of red and blue lights filled his car, tearing through the darkness and obliterating his night vision? They seemed to come from nowhere, screaming to life directly behind him. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through him. No, not now. He immediately pulled over to the gravel shoulder, the crunch of the tires loud in the sudden silence. He placed his hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions, just as he'd been trained to do in 100 simulations. But this wasn't a simulation. This was Oak Haven, Georgia, past midnight. He was a black man in a beater car, and a local police cruiser was right on his tail. His undercover identity, his mission, his very life were now balanced on a knife's edge. Through the rear-view mirror, he saw 2 figures emerge from the patrol car. Their silhouettes were stark against the blinding headlights. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet hum of the engine. He took a slow, deep breath, forcing the FBI agent to take control over the man. Calm. Compliant. De-escalate. The plan was already in ashes. The house of cards was starting to sway. The first officer approached the driver's side, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered pistol. He was a big man, his uniform straining at the seams. A flashlight beam shot out, pinning Jack in his seat. The officer's face was ruddy, framed by a thick moustache and a palpable air of authority that bordered on aggression. His name tag read Sinclair. License and registration. Officer Sinclair grunted his voice a low growl. He didn't say hello. He didn't state a reason for the stop. Evening, officer. Jack said, his voice even and respectful. He kept his hands locked on the wheel. May I ask why I was pulled over? You can ask after you give me your license and registration, Sinclair snapped back. Now. Jack maintained his composure. They're in the glove box, sir. I'm going to reach for them slowly. He moved with deliberate, exaggerated slowness, opening the glove compartment and retrieving the documents for his alias Malik Hayes. He passed them out the window. Sinclair snatched them. The second officer, younger and leaner, with the name Davis on his tag, lingered by the passenger side rear door, his eyes scanning the car's interior. He was quiet, a silent observer to Sinclair's lead. Sinclair shone his flashlight on the ID, then back at Jack's face, then back to the ID. He was taking his time, drawing out the moment. Malik Hayes, he said, tasting the name with theatrical disdain. What brings you to Oak Haven, Mr. Hayes? You're a long way from Atlanta. Just passing through, officer. Heading up north to visit family, Jack replied, sticking to the pre-rehearsed cover story. Family, huh? Sinclair smirked. In the middle of the night, on a deserted road, smells like bull to me. He tapped the car's roof with his flashlight. Step out of the vehicle. This was the escalation point, a request but delivered as a command. Thorne knew his rights, but he also knew the reality of the situation. Arguing now would only pour gasoline on a simmering fire. The mission was already compromised. His priority was now survival and de-escalation. Yes, sir, Jack said. He opened the door slowly and stepped out, keeping his hands visible at all times. The cruiser's headlights were blinding, making it impossible to see beyond the 2 officers. Turn around. Hands on the roof of the car, Sinclair ordered. Jack complied, placing his palms flat on the cool metal. The slight dampness of dew clung to the surface. He could feel Sinclair's presence directly behind him, the smell of cheap coffee and chewing tobacco. He heard the rustle of the officer's uniform, the click of a radio. Running a Georgia tag 4 Charles Lincoln 881, Sinclair said into his shoulder mic. And a license for one Malik Hayes. See what you find. While they waited, Sinclair began a pat-down. It wasn't professional. It was invasive, overly aggressive. He slapped Jack's pockets, ran his hands roughly down his legs. Jack remained perfectly still, his mind racing. "Don't react. Let him finish. The weapon is concealed. He won't find it with a simple pat-down." Then Sinclair's hand brushed against the small of his back. He froze. "Well now," Sinclair said, a new triumphant tone in his voice. "What do we have here?" He lifted Jack's shirt, and his fingers found the cold steel of the Glock. "Gun!" he shouted for no one's benefit but his own. In an instant, the situation detonated. Officer Davis, who had been silent until now, drew his weapon and aimed it at Jack. "Don't move. Don't you move a muscle." Sinclair yanked the Glock from its holster with a flourish. "Unregistered firearm, I'll bet. Explains what you're doing out here, doesn't it?" The click of handcuffs was deafening. Cold metal bit into Jack's wrists, cinched painfully tight. Sinclair shoved him forward, his face scraping against the car's roof. This was the point of no return. His cover was not just blown, it was annihilated. He was now an unidentified black man with an illegal firearm at the mercy of two hostile cops on a dark road. The mission was gone. The serpent was gone. All that remained was this raw, dangerous reality. "I am a federal agent," Jack said, his voice muffled by the car. He had to say it. He had no other choice. Sinclair laughed a short, ugly bark. "A federal agent? That's a new one. Is that what you criminals are calling yourselves these days?" "Let me see your badge, agent. It's in a concealed compartment in the dashboard," Jack explained, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. "My credentials are with it. If you'll just allow me—" "Allow you to what? Go for another gun?" Sinclair shoved him again, harder this time. "You're not touching anything. You're a liar and a felon." "Officer," Jack tried again, directing his voice toward the younger cop, Davis. "My name is Special Agent Jack Thorne, FBI, Atlanta Field Office, badge number 734. My ASAC is Vivian Knight. You are making a catastrophic mistake." Davis hesitated. He glanced at Sinclair, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The mention of a specific name, a specific title, had planted a seed of doubt. Sinclair saw it too. "Shut up!" he roared at Jack. Then to his partner, "Don't listen to his garbage, Ken. He's just trying to get in your head. It's what they do." The radio crackled to life. "Unit 12 dispatch. Registration for the vehicle comes back clean. But we have a red flag on the name Malik Hayes. Priors for possession with intent to distribute in DeKalb County. Subject should be considered armed and dangerous." Of course, the alias was designed to be authentic. A low-level criminal profile was part of the cover. To the Oakhaven PD, the computer had just confirmed their worst suspicions. Sinclair's face was flush with victory. "Armed and dangerous," he repeated, leaning close to Jack's ear, his voice dripping with venom. "I knew it. I can smell you guys a mile away. You thought you could come through my town. My town. You picked the wrong damn place." He jerked Jack away from the car and frog-marched him toward the back of the patrol vehicle. He threw him into the back seat with such force that Jack's head slammed against the hard plastic partition. The door slammed shut, and the world became a cage of wire mesh and plexiglass. Jack sat there, the adrenaline turning sour in his stomach. The handcuffs were cutting off his circulation. He looked at his watch. 12:14 a.m. The stop had begun at 12:05 a.m. 9 minutes. In 9 minutes, he had gone from a hunter to the hunted, from a federal agent to a common criminal. He watched through the mesh as Sinclair and Davis conferred. Sinclair was animated, waving the confiscated Glock around. Davis looked uneasy, casting nervous glances back at the car. Sinclair leaned against their cruiser, triumphant. "We got him, Kenny. We got a real prize tonight. The chief's gonna love this. An Atlanta thug with a gun right here in our jurisdiction. This is a good bust. A real good bust." Jack closed his eyes. ASAC Knight's words echoed in his mind. No contact unless it's a code, red. This was beyond red. This was a 5-alarm fire. He couldn't use his burner phone. He couldn't access his credentials. He was completely isolated. Sinclair thought he had won. He thought the story was over. He was wrong. The story was just beginning. And in the silent darkness, unbeknownst to the two small-town cops celebrating their prize, a signal had just been tripped. The tracking device in Jack's car, set to alert Knight's tactical team if he was stationary for more than 10 minutes in an unsanctioned location, had just gone live. On a laptop screen 20 miles away, a red dot representing Jack's Ford Fusion began to blink. ASAC. Vivian Knight looked at the screen, then at the heavily armed men of the FBI hostage rescue team surrounding her. "He's stopped," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "He's not at the meet point, and he's not moving. Send the drone. I want eyes on him. Now!" The shocking twist was already in motion, and it was coming for Officers Sinclair and Davis like a freight train in the night. Inside the suffocating confines of the Oak Haven PD cruiser, Jack Thorne focused on his breathing. In, out. Control the heart rate. Control the mind. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. The pain in his wrists was a sharp, constant reminder of his powerlessness, but his mind was already working, calculating, analyzing. Sinclair and Davis were conducting a full search of his undercover vehicle. He watched as Sinclair ripped open the glove box where the credentials were hidden, tossing papers aside with careless abandon. He wouldn't find the hidden release latch. It was designed to be overlooked in a cursory search. They pulled the prop electronics from the trunk, whooping with glee as if they'd discovered a cache of nuclear codes. "Look at this, Kenny!" Sinclair shouted, holding up a black box. "High-tech stuff. Bet this is for boosting cars or something." He was building a narrative, a fantasy of a big city criminal mastermind brought down by his own gut instinct. It was a story that would make him a hero at the local bar. Davis, however, seemed less certain. He kept looking from the car back to Jack, then up at the dark, empty sky, as if he sensed something was wrong with the picture. The initial adrenaline of the bust was wearing off, replaced by a gnawing unease. The suspect had been too calm. His words, though dismissed, had been too precise. Special Agent Jack Thorne, badge 734, ASEC Vivian Knight. These weren't the ramblings of a typical street hustler. "Levi," Davis said, his voice low. "Maybe we should, just double-check that federal agent thing. We could call the Atlanta field office just to be sure." Sinclair shot him a look of pure contempt. "Are you kidding me? And say what, 'Excuse me, FBI. We just arrested a black guy with a gun who claims he's one of yours. They'll laugh us off the phone. We have the gun. We have the priors on his alias. It's a closed case. Don't go soft on me, Ken. This is how you make a name for yourself." As Sinclair spoke, Jack heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound far in the distance. A low thrumming like a swarm of angry hornets. It was a sound he knew well, the sound of multi-rotor drones. He tilted his head, listening. It was getting closer. ASAC Knight's voice was ice-cold in the command van. "I have visual. One subject cuffed in the back of a patrol car. That's Thorne. 2 local LEOs searching his vehicle. They have his service weapon. This is a compromised agent scenario. All teams converge on my position. ETA 2 minutes. We go in silent, then we go in hard. Rules of engagement de-escalate, but dominate. The agent's safety is paramount. The HRT operators, clad in black tactical gear and night vision goggles piled into matte black Chevrolet Suburbans. Engines roared to life. They were a rapid response force, a surgical instrument of federal power, and they were about to descend on 2 small-town cops who thought they were having the best night of their careers. The thrumming sound grew louder. Davis heard it now, too. "What is that?" he asked, looking around nervously. "Probably just some kids with one of those toy helicopter things." Sinclair scoffed, though he too was now scanning the darkness above. Then out of the blackness, 3 sets of headlights appeared down the road, moving fast. They weren't police cars. They were large, black SUVs, and they were silent, bearing down on their location with predatory speed. "Who the hell is that?" Sinclair muttered, his bravado finally cracking. The SUVs screeched to a halt, forming a perfect semicircle around the patrol car, their high beams turning the scene into a stark, overexposed stage. Doors flew open, and a dozen men poured out. They moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency that spoke of endless training. They were specters in the night, armed with M4 rifles, pointed downward in a state of relaxed readiness that was more intimidating than any overt threat. On their black uniforms in bold white letters were 3 words, FBI. Sinclair and Davis were frozen, caught in the crossfire of a dozen piercing headlights. Their world had shrunk to this tiny, illuminated patch of gravel on the side of a forgotten Georgia road. A woman stepped out of the lead vehicle. She was of medium height, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a face that was all sharp angles and sharper intelligence. She wore a black jacket with the same FBI markings. This was ASAC Vivian Knight. She walked toward the 2 officers, her steps measured and deliberate. She didn't shout. She didn't run. Her presence alone radiated an authority that made the air crackle. "Officers," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of the entire United States Department of Justice. "I am Assistant Special Agent in Charge Vivian Knight, FBI, Atlanta. You are currently interfering with a Class A federal investigation under Title 18 of the U.S. Code. You are also illegally detaining a federal agent." Sinclair's jaw worked, but no sound came out. His face, moments ago flushed with pride, was now a hot, doughy mask of disbelief. Knight's eyes were like chips of ice. "Put the weapon, my agent's weapon, on the hood of your vehicle. Then place your own firearms on the hood as well. Do it now." It wasn't a request. It was a command that bypassed every local chain of command and went straight to the primal instinct of survival. Davis, looking utterly terrified, was the first to comply. He slowly unholstered his pistol and placed it gently on the hood. His hands were shaking. Sinclair hesitated for a fraction of a second, his mind unable to process the cataclysmic shift in reality. A dozen M4s subtly shifted their muzzles, now aimed at his center mass. The message was clear. With a trembling hand, Sinclair placed the Glock 19 on the hood, followed by his own service weapon. "Good," Knight said, her tone unchanged. She nodded to one of her HRT operators. "Get my agent." The operator opened the back of the cruiser, the keys seeming to appear in his hand as if by magic. He uncuffed Jack, his movements swift and professional. "You okay, sir?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," Jack said, rubbing his raw wrists. He stepped out of the car and into the surreal scene, blinking against the lights. He looked at Knight, and a silent conversation passed between them, a mix of relief, frustration, and shared understanding. Then he turned his gaze to Sinclair. The change in Officer Levi. Sinclair was profound. The swagger was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed terror. The man who had been a king on this dark road just minutes before was now a nobody, a fly caught in a web he didn't even know existed. His authority had been an illusion, a paper-thin shield that had just been vaporized by a force he couldn't comprehend. Jack walked over to the hood of the patrol car and picked up the Glock 19. He checked the magazine, holstered it securely at his back, then turned to face the two local cops. "Officer Sinclair," Jack said, his voice calm and clear, but carrying a new weight. "You asked me what I was doing in your town." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "I'm here to hunt monsters, and it turns out I came to the right place." The shock had landed. The twist was complete. But for Levi Sinclair, the karma was just getting started. And it was going to be brutal. The aftermath on Chestnut Street was a scene of quiet, controlled chaos. The HRT operators secured the scene with chilling efficiency, their professionalism a stark indictment of the sloppy, aggressive conduct that had preceded their arrival. Isaac Knight drew Sinclair and Davis aside, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. Yet every word landed like a hammer blow. "Your chief of police, a Mr. Brody, is on his way," she informed them, checking her phone. "He was surprised to hear from me. You two are to remain here. You will not speak to each other. You will not touch your radios. You are for all intents and purposes part of a federal crime scene now. Am I understood?" Davis nodded numbly, his face ashen. Sinclair, however, was beginning to find a sliver of his old bluster fueled now by desperation. "You can't do this," he stammered, his eyes darting between Knight and the silent, imposing figures of the HRT. "This is our jurisdiction. We made a good stop. He had a gun. His alias had priors." "Officer Sinclair," Knight interrupted, stepping closer to him. Her 5'6" frame seemed to tower over the much larger man. "Your good stop has just torpedoed a 6-month multi-agency operation to take down a human trafficking organization responsible for the disappearance of at least 19 people, 3 of them from this state. Your contact, Jimmy Sykes, who was waiting for my agent a mile down the road, has vanished. The window to get to the head of this organization, a man we call the Serpent, has likely slammed shut. So please tell me more about your good stop." Sinclair's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. The color drained from his face. Human trafficking. The Serpent. These were things he heard about on the national news, not things that happened in his quiet little corner of Georgia. Jack Thorne, meanwhile, was methodically retrieving his credentials from the hidden compartment in his car. With a simple, non-obvious sequence of pressing the hazard button and turning the radio dial, a small section of the dashboard popped open. He pulled out his FBI badge and identification, walked over to Sinclair, and held it inches from his face. The gold shield gleamed under the harsh glare of the headlights. "Special Agent Jack Thorne," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Read it." Sinclair stared at the badge, his eyes wide with the horror of his mistake. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a lie. This wasn't a T. Levi. It was real. He hadn't arrested a criminal. He had arrested the law. A beat-up sedan, its engine sputtering, pulled up 20 minutes later. A portly man in a rumpled police uniform, Chief Frank Brody, climbed out. He looked overwhelmed, like a man who had been woken from a deep sleep to find his house on fire. "Isaac Knight?" he asked tentatively. "Chief Brody." Knight greeted him, shaking his hand with a firm grip that seemed to surprise him. "We have a situation." For the next hour, Knight and Thorne laid it out for him in excruciating detail right there on the side of the road. They explained the scope of the undercover operation, the importance of the missed meeting, and the actions of his two officers. Chief Brody listened, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, then to a deep, weary anger. He looked over at Sinclair and Davis, who stood silently by their car, like statues of disgrace. "Levi." "Ken." Brody sighed, shaking his head. "What in God's name were you thinking? They will be the subject of a federal investigation for obstruction of justice," Knight stated plainly. "Their firearms will be taken as evidence. We will be taking their body cam footage, their dash cam footage, and all audio from the stop. We will also be launching a full review of the Oak Haven Police Department's policies, training, and past conduct." This was the next level of consequence. It wasn't just about Sinclair and Davis anymore. Their actions had put their entire department under a federal microscope. As the sun began to hint at its arrival, casting a pale grey light over the scene, the FBI packed up as quickly as they had arrived. Jack's car was taken away on a flatbed to be processed as evidence of the compromised operation. He would ride back with Knight. Before he left, he walked over to where Officer Davis was standing. The young cop couldn't meet his eyes. "Why?" Jack asked him, his voice quiet. "You hesitated. You had a doubt. Why did you go along with it?" Davis finally looked up. His eyes filled with a miserable mix of fear and shame. "Sinclair. He's a senior officer. He's persuasive. He said we had to be tough, that people from out of town were trouble. He said it was our job to protect Oak Haven." "Protect it from what?" Jack pressed. "From a man driving a Ford Fusion." Davis had no answer. He just shook his head, looking down at his boots. Jack left him there and got into the Suburban with Knight. As they pulled away, leaving the two disgraced officers in the care of their bewildered chief, Knight turned to him. "You holding up?" she asked. "I'm angry." Jack admitted, the mask of professional calm finally slipping. "Angry that my cover is blown, that the serpent is spooked. But mostly, I'm angry that it was so damn easy for him. For Sinclair, he didn't see a driver. He didn't see a citizen. He saw a target, and his badge gave him the power to act on that bigotry." "I know, Jack," Knight said softly. "But this isn't over. We lost the serpent tonight, but we might have found a different kind of rot. There's something wrong in Oak Haven. That stop wasn't just a random act of prejudice. It felt too aggressive, almost personal." She was right. As the federal investigation began to dig into the lives of officers Levi Sinclair and Ken Davis, they would soon discover that the traffic stop on Chestnut Street wasn't random at all. Sinclair hadn't just been a racist cop on a power trip. He had a reason to be terrified of a stranger asking questions on that particular road. The karma was coming, but first the truth had to be unearthed. And the truth was buried deep in the toxic soil of Oak Haven, connected to a secret far more sinister than anyone at the FBI could yet imagine. Levi Sinclair had tried to jail a federal agent to protect his town. But the shocking twist was he was actually trying to protect himself. The investigation into the Oak Haven Police Department began with the cold, sterile precision of a surgical procedure. FBI agents from the Atlanta office descended on the small municipal building, their dark suits and serious demeanors, a stark contrast to the town's sleepy atmosphere. Chief Brody, humbled and cooperative, gave them full access. They were looking for obstruction, civil rights violations, and departmental failures. What they started to find was something much worse. Jack Thorne, though officially pulled from the trafficking case, was assigned to the task force investigating Oakhaven PD, working directly under Knight. It was personal now. He spent days in a windowless room, poring over personnel files, incident reports, and hours of bodycam footage from Sinclair and Davis. A pattern began to emerge with Officer Levi Sinclair. He had an unusually high number of traffic stops involving out-of-state plates, particularly those driven by minorities. He had a dozen civilian complaints filed against him over 5 years, for excessive force verbal abuse and illegal searches, all of them dismissed by a cursory internal review. Sinclair is a classic bully with a badge, Jack told Knight, pointing to a highlighted report. But it's more than that. Look at the geography of his stops. 80% of them are on the north and east outskirts of town. Chestnut Street, Old Mill Road, River's End. He's patrolling these deserted roads like a wolf guarding a den. The same area our intelligence pointed to as a transit corridor for the Serpent. Knight mused, her eyes narrowing. It's a long shot, but what if it's not a coincidence? The key to unlocking the puzzle came from the weaker link, Officer Ken Davis. Under the immense pressure of a federal investigation and facing the end of his career, Davis crumbled. In a formal interview with Jack and another agent, he made a startling confession. It wasn't a random stop. Davis admitted, his voice barely a whisper. He was seated at a metal table, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. We were told to be there. Jack leaned forward. Told by who? Sinclair, Davis said. But he was getting paid. Off the books. Cash. A guy would meet him once a week. Told him to keep an eye on certain roads on certain nights. To stop any unfamiliar cars, especially ones that looked like, you know. He said it was about keeping drugs and crime out of Oakhaven. Who was paying him? Jack pressed. I don't know his name, Davis stammered. I only saw him once. Sinclair called him Mr. Peters. He drove a big, fancy pickup truck. Sinclair told me it was just a concerned local businessman, part of a neighborhood watch fund. He gave me $100 a few times to keep quiet and just follow his lead. Mr. Peters. It was a new thread. The investigators ran the name through every database they had. No prominent local businessmen named Peters. No one matching the description. It was a dead end. But Jack had a hunch. Sinclair wasn't just protecting a road. He was protecting a route. The Serpent's route. Could a small-town cop be on the payroll of a major human trafficking ring? It seemed audacious, but it fit the pieces. Sinclair's violent, over-the-top reaction to Jack's presence on Chestnut Street suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't just bigotry. It was panic. He thought Jack was a rival criminal, or worse, law enforcement that had stumbled onto his turf. He wasn't trying to make a good bust. He was trying to neutralize a threat to his illicit side hustle. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: financial records. Sinclair's bank statements showed his modest police salary. But a deeper dive subpoenaing records from banks in neighboring counties revealed a safety deposit box. When federal agents with a warrant drilled it open, they found what they were looking for: over $80,000 in cash, bundled in rubber bands. The final nail in the coffin was a burner phone found in the box with the cash. Its call log had only a handful of numbers. One of them cross-referenced with data recovered from the fringes of the now botched Serpent investigation was a number that had briefly pinged a cell tower near the original meet point with Jimmy Weasel Sykes. They had the connection. Levi Sinclair wasn't just a dirty cop. He was an employee. He was the local eyes and ears for the Serpent's trafficking operation, paid to ensure the roads were clear for human cargo to pass through undisturbed. He was the gatekeeper. Knight convened an emergency meeting. "He's part of it," she said, her voice tight with fury. "Sinclair is part of the trafficking ring. He used his badge as a shield to protect monsters. He tried to jail you, Jack, because he was terrified you were there to expose him." The karma was about to get biblical. The charges were no longer just obstruction and civil rights violations. They were escalating to conspiracy, racketeering, and aiding and abetting human trafficking under the RICO Act. Armed with this new explosive evidence, they brought Sinclair in again. This time, he wasn't the cocky officer in his own station. He was a suspect in a federal interrogation room. Jack and Knight sat across from him. Jack laid a photo on the table. It was a picture of a 16-year-old girl named Sarah, one of the Serpent's victims, who was still missing. "This is Sarah Jenkins," Jack said quietly. "She was taken from a bus stop about 60 miles from here. We believe the car that took her drove down Chestnut Street on a Tuesday night 2 months ago. You were on patrol that night, weren't you?" "Levi." Sinclair stared at the photo, his face turning a sickly grey. The sweat beaded on his forehead. "We know about the money, Levi," Knight added. "We know about the burner phone. We know about Mr. Peters. We know you were paid to keep that road clear for them. You weren't keeping criminals out. You were letting them pass." Sinclair began to tremble. His world, his lies, his pathetic little emir of corruption was dissolving around him. "You're a disgrace to the uniform," Jack said, his voice laced with cold contempt. "You took an oath. While I was out here risking my life to save people like her, you were taking blood money to help enslave them. You didn't just try to jail an FBI agent. You sided with the monsters." Sinclair finally broke. A guttural sob escaped his lips. I didn't know," he whimpered. "He told me it was just contraband. Untaxed cigarettes, stuff like that. I swear to God I didn't know it was people." "It doesn't matter if you knew," Knight said, standing up. "You're part of the machine that did this, and we're going to use you to tear that machine apart." The hunt for the Serpent was back on, and their new lead investigator was the disgraced, terrified Oakhaven cop who had tried to put Jack Thorne in jail. The irony was devastating. Levi Sinclair was about to find out what happens when you make a deal with the devil and then try to frame the one man who could have saved you. Levi Sinclair's world had shrunk to the size of a sterile federal interrogation room. The blustering authority he once wore like a second skin had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollowed-out man trembling on the edge of an abyss. Faced with the unassailable evidence of his crimes and the chilling specter of a lifetime in a maximum security prison, he broke. The confession wasn't a single event, but a slow, agonizing bleed of names, dates, and sordid details. Each word a betrayal of the masters he had once feared, and a desperate bid for his own survival. He sat across from Jack Thorne and Asac Vivian Knight, his face pale, his hands cuffed to a ring on the table. He recounted his recruitment by the man he knew as Mr. Peters, whose real name Robert Peterson the FBI had already uncovered. He described the weekly cash drop-offs, the burner phones, the coded instructions to patrol or avoid certain roads. He insisted with the pathetic earnestness of a damned soul that he believed he was only facilitating the movement of contraband goods. He told me it was untaxed liquor, maybe electronics. Sinclair rasped, his eyes pleading. "I swear to God I didn't know it was people." He showed me pictures of my wife getting groceries, my son at baseball practice. He said if I ever talked, if I ever got curious, they would be attending my funeral. Jack leaned forward, his expression unreadable, his voice a blade of ice. Welcome to the world you helped protect, Sinclair. That fear you feel now, the victims of your contraband have been living in it every second of every day, thanks to you. There was no sympathy in the room, only the cold calculus of opportunity. Sinclair, the corrupt cop, was now Sinclair, the asset. His terror was the key that could unlock the entire network. Under the crushing weight of RICO charges, he agreed to cooperate fully. He would become a puppet, his strings pulled by the very agent he had tried to destroy. The week that followed was a masterclass in controlled tension. In the FBI's Atlanta field office, a task force worked around the clock architecting the sting operation. The plan was audacious, fraught with risk. They would use Sinclair to re-establish contact with Peterson, feeding him a story about a new player, a high-level security consultant who could guarantee a much larger, safer transit corridor through the state for the right price. This new player, a deep-cover specialist named Agent Ray Diaz, would be the bait. Jack personally briefed Diaz, a quiet, intense agent with a gift for mimicry. In a secured room, they went over every detail of the Malik persona Jack had inhabited, refining it, adding layers of authenticity that would stand up to Peterson's scrutiny. Peterson is a mid-level manager who thinks he's a kingpin, Jack explained, pacing before a whiteboard covered in diagrams of the trafficking network. He's arrogant, but he's not stupid. He'll test you. He'll push you. Your goal isn't to fool him forever. It's to fool him for long enough. You need to be better than me, Ray. You need to make him believe you are the solution to a problem he didn't even know he had. The problem they decided would be the arrest of Malik Hayes. Sinclair was instructed to tell Peterson that his recent bust of a city thug had brought unwanted attention from the state police, making the old routes unreliable. It was a plausible lie, one that fed into Sinclair's supposed competence and Peterson's paranoia. The pitch was simple: we need a professional to handle security now. As the day of the operation arrived, the air at the staging area, a vast, disused warehouse 10 miles from Oakhaven, was thick with anticipation. It was a city of ghosts, populated by over 100 federal and state officers, moving with quiet purpose amidst a fleet of blacked-out vehicles and piles of tactical gear. Jack stood before a large, glowing satellite map, his role transformed. He was no longer the bait. He was the hunter directing the pack. He felt the familiar thrum of adrenaline, but it was different now, tempered by the weight of command and the searing memory of his own ordeal on Chestnut Street. This wasn't just for the 19 known victims. It was for every person who had ever been judged, dismissed, and targeted under the color of authority. At 20:30 hours, he made his final address to the team leaders. Peterson believes he's meeting Agent Diaz at the old Oakhaven textile mill at 2100. He's arrogant. He thinks this town, these roads, belong to him. He thinks the law is something he can buy and sell. Tonight, we teach him it is not for sale. We take back the night. Let's go to work. Inside the mobile command center, a van crammed with humming electronics, Jack and Knight watched a mosaic of screens. They saw Agent Diaz, wired for sound, take his position inside the skeletal remains of the mill. They saw a live feed from a Reaper drone circling invisibly miles above its thermal camera, painting the world in eerie shades of white and black. And on a smaller screen, they saw Levi Sinclair isolated in a guarded vehicle. His part in the drama played now just a spectator to his own damnation. At 21:05, a black Ford F-150 crunched over the gravel and parked. Robert Peterson emerged. He was a big man, dressed in expensive jeans and a leather jacket, projecting an air of casual menace. The meeting began. Agent Diaz's calm voice filled the command van, followed by Peterson's gravelly baritone. They danced the verbal dance of criminals, speaking of logistics, percentages, and risk. Then came the moment of truth. "Look, you talk a good game," Peterson's voice crackled in Jack's ear. "But my boss, the Serpent, he's very particular. He wants to see the new product before we agree to anything. I'm headed over to the depot now to check on a fresh shipment. You follow me in your car. No calls, no radio. If he likes what he sees and I like what I see, we have a deal." A wave of triumph washed through the van. He'd taken the bait. Peterson was leading them straight to the victims. "He's on the move," Jack announced into his command microphone, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "All teams maintain Ghost Protocol. Stay dark. Air support, you are our eyes. Do not lose him for a second." The silent pursuit began. A dozen FBI vehicles, their lights off, shadowed Peterson's truck through the labyrinthine backroads of rural Georgia. It was a tense, nerve-wracking 20 minutes. In the van, Jack watched the GPS trackers on the map, a predator closing in on its prey. Finally, Peterson's truck swerved onto a long, unpaved driveway, nearly swallowed by overgrown woods, leading to a dilapidated farmhouse and a large windowless barn. "He's at the target location," the drone operator reported, his voice tight. "I have confirmation. Multiple structures. The main barn is lit up like a Christmas tree on thermal. I'm counting. 15, maybe 16 distinct heat signatures huddled together. This is the holding facility." Night turned to Jack, her eyes reflecting the glow of the monitors. The moment was here. All the planning, the risk, the anger, it all led to this. She nodded. "It's your call, Jack. Light them up." Jack took a deep, steadying breath, the ghosts of the victims in his mind. He keyed his mic. "All teams, this is a GIO. I say again, this is a Gano. Execute. Go, go, go." The night exploded. The quiet farmhouse became the epicenter of a controlled earthquake. HRT Suburbans, seemingly appearing from the earth itself, stormed the driveway. An armored Bearcat vehicle smashed through the property's rusted gate as if it were made of paper. Flashbang grenades arced through the air, detonating with concussive blasts that shattered the silence. The air filled with shouted commands that echoed like the voice of God, FBI. Hands in the air, down on the ground. Peterson was yanked from his truck, his face a mask of pure shock, the swagger of the confident criminal instantly replaced by the terror of the cornered rat. 4 other traffickers armed with handguns and caught completely by surprise were subdued and cuffed with brutal efficiency. While the tactical teams swept the property, Jack Knight and a designated entry team moved toward the barn. As they approached, the metallic tang of fear and unwashed bodies hit them a smell so foul it was almost a physical blow. An HRT operator kicked open the large sliding door, and the team poured in, weapons raised. The scene inside was a tableau from hell. In a series of crude pens fashioned from plywood and chain-link fencing, 13 people were huddled on beds of dirty straw. They were gaunt, terrified, their eyes wide, and reflecting the beams of the agents' flashlights. For a moment, they flinched, expecting more violence. Then as they saw the bold FBI letters on the agents' vests, a wave of confusion, then disbelief, then a fragile, dawning hope washed over their faces. Jack scanned the pens, his heart aching. His eyes landed on a pale, red-haired girl with haunted eyes clutching a tattered blanket. She looked up at him, and he knew instantly. "Sarah." He asked, his voice softer than he intended. The girl, Sarah Jenkins, could only nod, tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. A profound, overwhelming wave of emotion crashed over Jack, a feeling so potent it almost buckled his knees. This was it. This was the why. It was the answer to the humiliation on Chestnut Street, to the sleepless nights, studying case files, to the risk and the rage. It was the face of a life given back. As paramedics and victim specialists flooded the barn, gently leading the survivors out into the cool night air and wrapping them in warm blankets, Jack stepped back outside. He saw Robert Peterson on his knees being read his rights. He saw the other traffickers lined up in cuffs, and across the yard he saw Levi Sinclair being escorted to a separate transport vehicle. His head bowed, his face illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights he once commanded. Their eyes met for a fleeting, silent moment across the chaotic scene. Jack felt no triumph, no surge of victory. He felt only the immense, crushing weight of it all, the tragedy of the victims, the disgrace of the captors, and the pathetic, hollowed-out corruption of the man who had started it all with a simple, hateful act on a dark country road. The takedown was a resounding success, but it was a victory scarred by the deep, ugly wounds of the battle. In the end, Officer Levi Sinclair was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, not for the traffic stop, but for his role in the human trafficking conspiracy. His partner, Ken Davis, received a lighter sentence of 2 years probation and community service for his cooperation. His law enforcement career over forever. Chief Brody retired, and the Oak Haven Police Department was fundamentally restructured under federal oversight. The Serpent, identified through Peterson's testimony as a Miami-based businessman named Julian Croft, was eventually apprehended in an international sting operation. But the real story isn't about the prison sentences or the headlines. It's about the terrifying truth of how easily power can be corrupted and how bigotry can serve as a smokescreen for deeper evils. It's about Special Agent Jack Thorne, a man who faced down prejudice and danger, not with a weapon, but with unwavering integrity. He reminded us that the true battle is often fought not on dark roads, but in the hearts of men. If this story of justice, resilience, and the shocking truth that lies beneath the surface resonates with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video to spread awareness about the complexities of law enforcement and the courage it takes to expose the truth. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where karma isn't just a concept, but a reckoning. Thank you for listening.